King Tut. I think everyone's heard of the name King Tut.
King Tutankhamun.
I guess he was a pharaoh, right?
When I was little, King Tut was very fascinating to me.
For being entombed, that's the big one.
For 3,000 years, like, existing in obscurity, and then all of a sudden your tomb is discovered and you're like this celebrity.
That is awesome.
King Tut ruled Egypt more than 3,000 years ago. But was his life all that interesting? Not really.
Because during his reign, he doesn't really do very much.
Then they shoved him in the ground for 3,245 years with all his royal possessions.
No one really gets excited about a 3,000-year-old skeleton in the desert until he's surrounded by gold.
Ooh, shiny.
And he became history's unlikeliest superstar.
He's up there with sort of Jesus or Gandhi.
Okay.
It's just one of those names that will have absolute recognition all around the world.
You could ask any person on the street, tell me about Egypt. They will know the name King Tut.
It's been 100 years since the modern world first met King Tut.
For 3,000 years, he had a restful peace, and then he became thrown into the spotlight.
Since then, he's been the subject of more than 5,500 books.
I'll take that one.
And 860,000 news articles, or about 3 every day.
Interesting.
He's also spawned a multi-billion-dollar movie franchise.
King Tut has had a huge impact on our modern culture.
His influence, whether it's fashion, clothing, architecture, it's just going to continue to grow.
He's the lost king,
Tutankhamun was forgotten. It's a really incredible story.
who reappeared out of nowhere and changed the modern world.
Hey, look, it's King Tut.
They say in ancient Egypt that if people keep saying your name
King Tut.
King Tut.
whilst you're in the afterlife,
King Tut.
King Tut.
King Tut.
then you will live forever.
This is the story of King Tut, the celebrity pharaoh. Ever look at an American $1 bill and wonder, why in the world is there a pyramid on it?
That's weird.
It's there because of a super celebrity influencer.
It says, "In God we trust," right next to a pyramid. It's one of those things we can associate with not only Egyptian history, but King Tut's discovery specifically.
As of 2020, there are 13.1 billion $1 bills in circulation, all stamped with a salute to ancient Egypt because of King Tut's popularity. It takes some serious star power to change the face of money, especially another country's money. The story of how an ancient Egyptian aristocrat put his nation's stamp on the U.S. greenback starts with an English aristocrat in 1901.
Lord Carnarvon is the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, and his house is Highclere.
Ooh, fancy.
And you probably remember it because it is on Downton Abbey.
He was one of the richest men in England, and he was just a playboy, really, earlier in life. He owned racehorses. He sailed around the world. He got into all kinds of adventures.
Lord Carnarvon liked his cars, too. He liked them expensive, and he liked them fast.
He enjoyed speeding. If he wasn't speeding, his chauffeur was speeding. And actually, he was brought up in front of the magistrates on numerous occasions.
Lord Leadfoot's first speeding ticket was for cruising at a reckless 12 miles per hour.
Hip, hip.
And a second time, a downright death-defying 25 miles per hour.
Stop right there.
He led this very adventurous, risky lifestyle until in 1901, Carnarvon was speeding in a motor car down country lanes in the German countryside, and there were a couple of cattle-drawn carts in a blind dip in the road. He didn't see them until the last minute, so he swerved. and ended up in the mud with his car on top of him. He never fully recovered from that. His health was weak. His lungs, in particular, were damaged from the accident. So he wasn't able to do a lot of the activities that he'd been doing before. The winters in England in particular, were very difficult for him with his weak lungs, so he started wintering in Egypt, and he became captivated by Egyptology.
Egyptology is the study of all things ancient Egypt. Gods, pharaohs, pyramids, hieroglyphics, the whole shebang. It's all the rage at the time, and the former Mr. Fast and Imperious is all in. He sets himself the lofty goal of finding a lost pharaoh's tomb full of treasure.
And at the time, the Antiquities Service in Egypt, they were collaborating with rich amateurs to fund the excavations.
He had plenty of money to underwrite an excavation. It seemed like a natural hobby for him to pick up.
The civilization we call ancient Egypt lasted for more than 3,000 years. That's 13 times longer than the United States has been a country. Over that time, it was ruled by a succession of 30 separate dynasties and at least 200 pharaohs. When an Egyptian pharaoh died, they checked out in style.
You then had pyramids, and they'd create these beautiful royal tombs full of everything, just beautiful golden items, treasures, jewelry, but all of those amazing kind of details of everyday life to help him live in the afterlife.
Later, many pharaohs were entombed in what's now called the Valley of the Kings, just outside modern-day Luxor.
It's sort of hidden away behind the cliffs, quite hard to get to, and then they dug their tombs into the bedrock with these hidden entrances. So the idea was that that would be much more protected against looters, and they were more likely to be able to keep their mummies and all of their possessions intact.
If Lord Moneybags is going to find his treasure tomb, this is the best place to look. Except he isn't exactly a 9-to-5 guy when it comes to putting in a hard day's work.
He was very much upper class and didn't want to get his hands dirty at all. But also, he didn't really understand the process of archaeology at all. So he needed a right-hand man. His right-hand man to do that was Carter.
Carnarvon teams up with Howard Carter, an archaeologist who's been working in Egypt for 15 years searching for treasure. In particular, he's looking for a little-known pharaoh whose tomb has never turned up. His name is Tutankhamun.
There really wasn't a lot that people or academics or Egyptologists knew about King Tut.
There were only a few references to him found in some other tombs.
Carter figures Tut's tomb is tucked away somewhere under them thar hills in the Valley of the Kings. By the time the team starts digging here, 61 tombs in the valley have already been discovered, numbered by archaeologists from KV1 to KV61. But so far, they've contained 0 treasure.
These tombs were being looted even in ancient Egyptian times, so there was nothing still in these tombs. The mummies weren't still in these tombs.
Undeterred, the two men are dead set on making KV62 their number.
Quite right. Jolly good.
It's a little weird that, like, white people and, like, Americans and Europeans just go around digging up other people.
What attracts so many people? Probably the gold.
But at the same time, I also want to know what's in that grave.
There has to be something to do with the aliens, right?
It's rediscovering past lives that people completely forgot about.
In the Valley of the Kings, they found very, very little for 5 years. And they were really being ridiculed by others around them at the time.
Disappointed by the lack of progress, Carnarvon spends more and more time back in England. He's ready to pull the plug on Egypt and find himself another hobby. Carter implores him to keep going for just one more season, their 7th digging in the valley.
This really was the last throw of the dice. He was like, okay, one more season.
King Tut has been missing for over 3,000 years. His fate now hinges on an all-or-nothing bet on lucky number 7.
So it was November 1922 when they finally started on that last season. And it was really Carter who kept that going. He had this conviction that Tutankhamun was going to be there.
It's the early morning of November 4th, 1922. Howard Carter, steps out of his mud brick house on the banks of the Nile to begin another day's digging in the Valley of the Kings. History will record this as the day that Carter, the English archaeologist, finally makes his big discovery. But the history books are wrong. And the real credit should go to someone you've probably never heard of. A 12-year-old Egyptian boy named Hussein Abdul Rasul.
He is a local water boy bringing water to the valley for all the Egyptian team that's working with Howard Carter excavating this area. And he needs to dig kind of a hole in the ground in order to place the water jug for it to stand upright. Using his foot to dig a hole in the ground, he discovers a cut stone ledge.
When Carter arrived, first thing that morning, the team were very quiet. At first, he was worried that there had been an accident, that someone had been hurt, and then they showed him that they had uncovered a step.
Carter immediately orders the team to get digging, revealing a second step and then a third.
The workmen continue to dig, and they, that day, uncover more and more steps. 16 steps in all, leading down to a door. And they uncover the top part of that door. Looks as if that door is still sealed.
The archaeologist knows he could be standing on the threshold of something huge, but there's just one problem.
But Carnarvon isn't there. Carnarvon is back at home on his estate in Berkshire.
Carter can't go any further and steal all the glory from his money man. So he sends Carnarvon a telegram that says, "At last have made a wonderful discovery in the valley. Congratulations." The Earl immediately hightails it to Egypt. Sort of. Leaving his partner stuck, waiting to make history.
Carter has to wait about 2 weeks for Carnarvon to get there. You can't just fly from London to Egypt. So they go back, they uncover the lower part of the door, and now there is the name of Tutankhamun. So they remove that door, and beyond it, eventually they come to a second door. Carter makes a small hole in the top corner of the door.
Huh? What's this?
So then he gets a candle and looks through the hole.
And inside, he can just see glimmers of gold and just objects everywhere.
He's speechless, and he's just standing there for moments without saying anything. And Lord Carnarvon, famously tells Howard Carter, "Oh, can you see anything? What do you see?" And it takes everything in Howard Carter just to utter, "Yes, wonderful things."
In KV-62, Carter and Carnarvon have hit the jackpot. There are exactly 5,398 wonderful things in Tut's tomb.
So much shiny things.
Including 3 golden chariots, 2 life-size statues of the pharaoh, 3 golden couches, 2 beds, 2 trumpets, and 1 throne.
King Tut's tomb really does stand as pretty much the biggest archaeological discovery of all time. It's just all of this incredible stuff.
So when the news actually finally hits the outside world, there's this mad rush to the Valley of the Kings, and this is the point where all of the reporters would stand there milling around, waiting for a piece of the action.
The whole world wants a piece of Tut. And he's arrived at the perfect time.
The timing of the discovery, when it happened, the telegraph was being introduced.
The first transatlantic cables stretch over 2,500 miles at a depth of more than 2 miles. By the 1920s, news that once took 2 weeks to cross the ocean now takes just 2 minutes.
If it would have happened 10 years earlier, it would not have been a global phenomenon. If it would have happened 10 years later, it might have been lost with all the other information. And it was the perfect timing for an event like this to occur.
The whole place is like a big, massive conglomeration of paparazzi, essentially. I mean, what do you do?
Realizing he's sitting on a gold mine, in more ways than one, Carnarvon cuts a deal with the Times of London. He gives them exclusive rights to photograph the contents of the tomb in return for 5,000 pounds, the equivalent today of around $360,000.
All of the other newspapers are royally annoyed about this, and they're trying to find other stories and other avenues to kind of get through.
On the 22nd of December, 1922, exactly 1 month after the tomb's entry, the New York Times runs a Tut story that opens an enduring can of worms.
Extra! Read all about it.
It includes a bit of journalistic fluff that will go on to spawn at least 19 horror movies over the next 100 years. It's about...
The curse.
The curse.
The curse.
The curse.
The curse of Tutankhamun.
When Lord Carnarvon gives the Times of London exclusive access to the discovery, its cross-Atlantic namesake, the New York Times, becomes desperate for any story to keep its Tut-obsessed readers satisfied.
That's where you get the first ideas of a curse. If I can't get the real story, then I'm going to fabricate a story. They try to sensationalize it so that they can sell papers as well, to kind of latch on to this huge find of Tutankhamun.
It's all about headlines. It's clickbait. It is early 1900s clickbait. The media hasn't changed much in how they deliver stories or titles. It's just a matter of how we get the information.
Tucked away in the Times reporter's description of the tomb is the first of many dubious Tut tales to come.
One of these stories included Howard Carter's pet canary, which he kept with him at his excavation house in Luxor.
The paper reports that at the same moment Carter and Carnarvon were busting into Tut's tomb, a real-life cobra broke into Castle Carter.
Is anybody home?
It was reported that soon after the tomb was opened and Lord Carnarvon and Howard Carter had discovered the tomb of King Tut, that a cobra had come into the house and made its way into the canary's cage and ate the poor bird.
Aha!
The cobra was later discovered still in the canary's cage with the bird in its mouth. According to the New York Times, it's a sign of
the wrath of the ancient gods.
So what they wanted to do is they wanted a sensational story. How can we jazz up this curse of Tutankhamun?
A cobra sits prominently on the headdress of King Tut. We associate cobras with the pharaohs. So people got very nervous.
The cobra incident is just the beginning. Within weeks, one of Tut's 2 discoverers will follow the canary into the great beyond.
Uh-oh.
Very quickly after Carter and Carnarvon discovered the tomb, so towards the end of that season, something happened that just changed the entire course of the work, which is that Carnarvon got bitten by a mosquito.
And unfortunately, one morning, as he's doing his daily routine and shaving, he cuts the mosquito bite with his razor.
Oh dear.
And it becomes infected.
He ended up with blood poisoning and eventually pneumonia. This is before the time of antibiotics.
17 days later, Lord Carnarvon, the career thrill-seeker and financier of the Tut excavation, dies.
I regret nothing.
It's reported that around the time that Lord Carnarvon actually died in Cairo, his favorite pet dog back at Highclere Castle in Great Britain lets out this huge howl and then falls over dead. And it was also reported in the news at the same time that Lord Carnarvon passed away or died, and then there was a blackout throughout the city of Cairo as well.
The coincidences made for sensational stories.
Get your papers.
Even though power outages in Cairo back then were a dime a dozen, and the Earl himself was always on the verge of switching off.
He was, you know, quite a frail man, but this whole idea of the curse is embroiled in his death as well. It just, I suppose, fuels the imagination of all the people around the world at the time.
Sure, I believe in the curse of King Tut. Why not?
You should not mess with a mummy, or you're going to be cursed forever.
I'm not really very superstitious, not since I stopped playing baseball. curse of King Tut. It's a relic from an ancient time, right? That sounds pretty curse-ish.
All of a sudden, King Tut has gone from long-lost pharaoh to an avenging spirit looking to kick some major archaeologist ass.
Even before Carnarvon's death, there was a sort of unease amongst a lot of the public, this idea of violating this king's resting place.
They embellished storylines and created conspiracy theories and imagined curses. You know, once you hear curse, like that catches my attention. Even if I don't believe in it, I want to read that article because just in case.
In 1934, Herbert Winlock, director of New York's Met Museum, tries to dispel the curse with an op-ed article that includes an eye-opening fact. Of the 22 people who were present at the opening of Tut's burial chamber, 6 died over the ensuing 11 years. But if there really is a curse, why didn't everybody die? For all his good intentions, Winlock's logic has a snowball's chance in the Sahara of changing anybody's mind.
In America, we do believe in curses. You know, ancient Egypt is so far removed, they could have had magic, sorcerers, nobody knows.
John Balderston, a New York columnist covering the Tut discovery, is fascinated by the curse story. 10 years later, he's on Sunset Boulevard typing out his first Hollywood screenplay. He's been told to adapt a story about a magician in San Francisco. So he moves the story to Egypt, ancient Egypt. He changes the magician's name to Imhotep. And to spice the story up, Balderston invents the Curse of Thoth. In 1932, The Mummy, starring Boris Karloff, is let loose on the world.
Death, eternal punishment for anyone who opens this casket.
The Mummy certainly helped to promote this idea of a pharaoh's curse, or the curse of a mummy that can be reanimated and track down his enemies, if you will, or those who disturbed his burial.
Hollywood then embellishes that. It ties into our fear. It takes us back to childhood where we look under our beds just in case.
90 years later, the Mummy franchise is still going strong. Since 1999, there have been 8 new Mummy movies. Together, they have grossed a total of $1.8 billion. That's twice as much as the current insurance value of the Tut tomb treasure trove.
I think of that movie, The Mummy, that I watched entirely too young and then was scared of toilet paper after.
Is King Tut a mummy? There's like the new versions of the mummy. That guy was a grown-ass adult. Okay, all right.
What the hell happened to Brendan Fraser's career? Where'd he go? He was everywhere, now he's gone. That's the curse of King Tut.
But what about the mummy who started it all? Who was the real pharaoh behind the bandages?
I think when people think of ancient Egyptian mummies, they do think of this kind of strange zombie-esque, the Hammer horror kind of association. If you unwrap the bandages, you'd look on the face of that person.
Writing in his diary, Howard Carter calls November 11th, 1925, a great day in the history of archaeology, because this is the day that he begins to unwrap Tut's bandages.
This isn't just history. You can unwrap the mummies and see their facial expressions, bringing these kings and queens of history from thousands of years ago to life.
Tut has been wrapped up tight for 3,245 years. And some of the ancient embalming fluids used on him have long since passed their expiry date.
The resins and oils that had been poured over the mummy in the coffin, they had set hard like glue.
The mummy, with its burial mask in place, is still lying in the coffin, stuck to the bottom. Carter begins the process of removing the layers of linen bandages one by one. Underneath the first layer, he discovers a gold amulet tucked inside the bandages. The farther he goes, the more he finds. A gold dagger, a bracelet, a scarab beetle, and a golden hawk.
unwrapping of the mummy of King Tut, they actually found 143 different amulets and pieces of jewelry within the wrappings of the mummy itself. And all of these objects were meant to serve as protection for the king and to help him transfigure into a god in the afterlife.
Carter realizes they are also signs of affection for the dead pharaoh from those he left behind.
It's your family member. This is the funerary practice. It's still very much the person that you've lost and you've grieved for and you've loved.
Finally, it's time to pry off his mask and reveal the real King Tutankhamun to the world. In the words of Carter, he's beautiful.
They unwrapped the mummy, looked at the body, and they realized Tutankhamun died when he was only 18.
He came to the throne when he was about 9 years old, and he dies this kind of mysterious death. Nobody really knows why.
It's a mystery science has yet to solve.
There are so many theories. There's been sickle cell anemia, epilepsy, malaria.
He might have been attacked by a hippo in the Nile.
There are other theories that he died whilst he was hunting on a chariot. Perhaps he died in battle. This whole mystery around his death, you know, it is really tantalizing to lots of people.
There's another, more controversial question whose answer remains locked within 30,000 human genes.
There is an obsession by scholars and researchers to try to identify the race of King Tutankhamun.
Is Tutankhamun black? Has he been depicted as being too white? I would say that actually, in reality, it's somewhere in the middle. And I think that we should just be really happy that they are part of the African diaspora and that these amazing people created such fabulous cultures on the African continent.
In a way, it probably would take something away from Tutankhamun if we did know. I think it's precisely that mystery, that uncertainty, that ability to tell new stories that has kept him so much in the sort of public fascination.
But back in the early 1920s, way before John Balderston bashed out his first draft of The Mummy, Tut is a rising star ready to go nova. Get ready for Tut-mania.
I would argue that King Tut is a part of pop culture because of the timing when King Tut was discovered.
This was an incredible moment. You're just a few years past the horrors of the First World War. You're into the roaring 20s, the age of jazz and flappers, and everyone's looking for glamour, luxury, fun, hope. And Tutankhamun's tomb just plays right into that. It's beyond everyone's dreams. And so this is exactly what everyone has been looking for.
In 1922, when the world is suddenly seeing Tutankhamun's tomb being revealed, and it just has this huge influence on the movie business.
On average, 50 million Americans are going to the flicks every week.
Middle-class America is thriving, and 3 out of 4 people will visit the movie theater at least once a week. I don't think we could afford to do that now.
The movie business is booming, and Hollywood wants to keep it that way. So it cashes in on the coincidental crazes, bringing the grandeur of ancient Egypt to Main Street in the form of 82 new temple-like cinemas.
Suddenly, all of these movie theaters are being built, not just in the US, but in the UK as well. And they have these beautiful kind of ancient Egyptian echoes to them, this whole idea of ancient Egypt and how fabulous and dazzling it is.
Tut isn't just changing how people go to the movies. He's changing the way we look thanks to 2 beautiful things hidden inside a whole lot of 4s. To explain, we need to rewind a bit. When Howard Carter gets his first glimpse of the wonderful things inside Tut's tomb, it's only the beginning. He'll eventually discover there are 4 separate rooms. He will break through 4 separate seals before entering the burial chamber itself. Inside the chamber, there's a huge gilt wooden shrine.
And you see this golden shrine. But actually, it's not just one shrine, there's 4.
Inside the innermost shrine, Carter finds a box-shaped sarcophagus, a stone coffin. Opening this, he discovers a second coffin in the shape of a person. Inside that is another, and finally, a fourth coffin. When Carter opens this, he reaches the innermost layer and is met by the mesmerizing eyes of the Golden Boy King staring back at him.
Hi there. What took you so long?
The mask, which is the sort of most famous symbolic artifact that we think about when we think about Tutankhamun. It gave the divine attributes, so protection, and enabled you to see in the underworld.
100 years later, we're still captivated by his darkly lined eyes.
I'm sure if you ask anyone on the street who was the first to wear guy liner, they would probably say punk rockers, goth kids, vamp kids. But Egyptian men wore eyeliner long before all that, so they definitely started that trend. Their influence on not only makeup, but beauty practices in general still is in the present day.
Back in the early days of Tut-mania, the pharaoh's eyeliner is everywhere. Thanks in part to the very first it girl, Clara Bow. Where she leads, millions of flappers follow.
You've got things like the popularity of sequins as well, because some of the items that were found in Tutankhamun's tomb are decorated with thousands of delicate beads and sequins, like little discs of gold, all feeding through, people wanting to get a piece of Tutankhamun and ancient Egypt.
I mean, Egypt influencing jewelry and design, that's so cool.
I do like the crazy eyeliner. That's definitely Egyptian inspired. Thank you for the fashion choices, King Tut.
Tut-mania really took off in the 1920s. People wanted Egyptian everything.
There's even a famous brand of condoms called Ramesses that were made in 23, and they amass a massive wealth in the 1930s.
It makes sense that marketing to young men during a period of kind of sexual liberation would appeal to their interest in being associated with an Egyptian god king. I guess you can make some analogy about wrapping it up.
Sex and fashion aren't the only things Tut's influencing. Remember that pyramid on the dollar bill? The Federal Reserve in Washington, D.C. adds it in 1935, cashing in on the pharaoh's soaring fame. But nowhere does Tut-mania quite like New York City, where his star power will do an end run around 1916ZL, better known as the 1916 zoning resolution, and change the Manhattan skyline forever.
We see the obsession with King Tut having a lot of impact on style, clothing, women's dresses, but especially architecturally. American culture is often about assimilating ideas and patterns from elsewhere. So it doesn't surprise me that one of our most iconic buildings is really reflecting our interpretation of an Egyptian style.
It's the story of how Tut took Manhattan, and it goes like this. The year is 1929. And architect William Frederick Lamb has a dilemma. He's been asked to design a new building for the Big Apple, one taller than any other in existence. But there's a problem.
In the early 20th century, New York City was a claustrophobic place. Because of the dense cityscape, it blocked out fresh air and sunlight from the people below.
In response, the city enacted the 1916 zoning resolution, putting strict limits on the size of new buildings. To get around it, Lamb goes back to the drawing board and takes inspiration from ancient Egypt.
I've got it.
He sketches a 5-story base that fills the lot. On top of that, he puts a tower, but set back. He adds additional setbacks, making the tower narrower and narrower at the 21st, 25th, 30th, 72nd, 81st, and 85th floors.
It gradually recedes from the base to the top, just like a pyramid. This was a plan to help shed more light on Manhattan.
It's called the Empire State Building, and at 1,454 feet becomes the tallest building in the world. So tall, in fact, it will tower 3 times higher than the Great Pyramid of Giza.
This was a 4,500-year Egyptian design, leaving its mark on the greatest modern city in the world, and all thanks to Tut-mania.
For a guy who left such a major mark on the Big Apple, Tut's afterlife address is pretty low-key.
It's much smaller than you would expect for a pharaoh's tomb compared to a lot of the other tombs that have been found in the Valley of the Kings.
There are 4 rooms in the tomb with dimensions that add up to a total of 908 square feet. To give you an idea of how big that is, compare it to your average Manhattan 1-bedroom apartment at 702 square feet. Pretty modest for a royal resting place, especially compared to one like the Taj Mahal. That site is 42 acres, or the same as about 31 football fields. Or the mausoleum of the first Qin Emperor of China. That site covers 20 square miles, or half of Disney World. By their standards, King Tut's tomb isn't even a broom closet.
With Carter and Carnarvon actually finding Tut's tomb, and the fact that it was so small and so inconspicuous, it's hard to believe that they were so lucky.
But why is Tut's tomb so small compared to others in the Valley of the Kings?
His reign wasn't very significant. He only ruled for about 9 years during the New Kingdom in ancient Egypt.
Did he do very much? And the thing is, not really.
So Tut was kind of a C- sovereign, a historical underachiever. Try telling that to the 1970s, when his tiny but intact tomb will launch Tut-mania 2 and make the pharaoh a bigger star than ever before.
In 1973, there is a war between Israel, Syria, and Egypt called the Yom Kippur War. And then Nixon intervenes and supports the Israelis. And because of this, there's a real backlash with the Arab states. They don't take this too lightly and decide not to supply the US with oil.
The conflict sends oil prices skyrocketing from $3 a barrel to $12 and causes long lines at the pump across the nation.
So Nixon's got a bit of trouble on his hands. He really has to make amends.
Nixon comes up with a plan to flip the script with the Arab states.
Presidents always find unique ways to find commonality with other countries. So he used the one thing he probably thought as a common ground to establish some relationship with the Middle East, and with Egypt in particular, King Tut.
So Nixon traveled to Egypt in 1974, asking if these treasures could come for this touring exhibition, because it was just seen that it would be an expression of goodwill, of people getting excited about Egypt, a collaboration between the two countries.
It's also planned to beat the competition with simple numbers. An exhibition of Tut's treasures has recently completed a 3-city tour around the Soviet Union.
Да, хорошо.
To outdo his Cold War rivals, Nixon persuades the Egyptians to put 3 more cities on the U.S. itinerary.
That's right.
And on top of the 50 items that were sent behind the Iron Curtain, Nixon wheels and deals an extra 5 for the U.S. To be on the safe side, he has the whole kit and caboodle transported to America in secret on a warship.
When the King Tut artifacts and treasures come to the United States and they do this 3-year tour throughout the country, they were insured for over $1 billion in their value. That's a staggering number, and especially for the time at the 1970s.
50 years after the first wave of Tut-mania, the old pharaoh is about to sweep the world off its feet once again.
In 1976, this huge tour of Tutankhamun treasures just happens in the US, and it's like 1922 all over again. You know, everybody goes nuts about him.
Tut-mania is back, bigger than ever, and the proof is in the numbers.
Here you got your tickets.
In Washington, D.C., the lineups circled 3 whole blocks.
Tickets there.
In Chicago, ticket holders face a 7-hour wait. In Los Angeles, scalpers are selling $2 tickets for $35.
Get your tickets.
That's a markup of more than 1,500%. By the time the exhibition closes, after visits to Seattle and New York, more than 8 million people will have come to see Tut.
Nixon bringing a mummy on tour as a political statement wouldn't have been my first move.
I don't think there were many political tools that Nixon didn't use.
I guess that kind of explains the curse. We know Nixon didn't finish well as far as his job was concerned.
I would have just gone for the good old 9th grade, like, vote for me and I'll give you a cupcake sort of thing.
Isn't that all American politics? Isn't that the entire Senate just like dry, desiccated, mummified, like old husks of humans? That's the U.S. Senate. Yeah, no, not that weird.
Tut's smash hit tour of the 70s culminates with a TV triumph.
The high moment for King Tut would have to be when Steve Martin made a song about him on SNL. That's how you know you made it, when you are parodied or there's satire about you on Saturday Night Live.
The 1970s won't be the last time Tut finds himself caught up in politics. In 2011, he'll be called off the bench to help rally his people against an oppressive regime.
The Arab Spring, which took place in 2011, and the Egyptian Revolution helped to promote the emergence of street artists. The streets of Cairo became a canvas, if you will, for all these different artworks by all these different artists.
One known only by his alias, Kaiser, paints a familiar image of protest. The Argentinian revolutionary Che Guevara. He's wearing his trademark beret. Only this time, he's also sporting King Tut's ceremonial beard.
I visited Egypt not that long after the revolution, and there was a lot of graffiti that was around, and one of the images that you would see as graffiti was the mask of Tutankhamun.
Street artist Marwan Shaheen follows Kaiser's lead and paints an image of the fictional anarchist V from the V for Vendetta comic series, wearing his trademark Guy Fawkes mask along with the headdress of the teenage pharaoh.
The mask of King Tutankhamun is actually fused together with the Guy Fawkes mask from the UK. And so by using this icon like the Guy Fawkes mask, which represents, the people fighting against their government, and fusing that with the iconic funerary gold.
I visited Egypt not that long after the revolution, and there was a lot of graffiti that was around, and one of the images that you would see as graffiti was the mask of Tutankhamun.
Street artist Marwan Shaheen follows Kaiser's lead and paints an image of the fictional anarchist V from the V for Vendetta comic series, wearing his trademark Guy Fawkes mask along with the headdress of the teenage pharaoh.
The mask of King Tutankhamun is actually fused together with the Guy Fawkes mask from the UK. And so by using this icon like the Guy Fawkes mask, which represents, the people fighting against their government, and fusing that with the iconic funerary gold mask of King Tutankhamun, the artists were speaking directly to the revolutionaries to, hold fast to their ancestral roots and to fight against this oppressive regime that was currently ruling Egypt.
The image quickly becomes a revolutionary signature piece, emblazoned on walls as a monochrome stencil, painted mural, or pop art poster.
You've got a people rising up wanting to assert their independence and their freedom, and they're looking back to this image of Tutankhamun to represent them in that.
King Tut being used as a political symbol. I mean, if he has a problem with it, he can't say anything now. So, being a mummy,
I mean, I'd rather King Tut than Bieber.
After 18 days of protest, the Egyptian regime is toppled. And Tut he's still just as popular as ever.
The irony is, someone like King Tut would be adamantly against and oppressing a revolution, but using his image makes perfect sense because that is the one image that everyone in Egypt can get behind and obviously understand.
The great pharaohs of ancient Egypt went to epic lengths for a shot at eternal life. But all their best-laid plans were spoiled by looters. By drifting into obscurity for more than 3,000 years, young and insignificant Tutankhamun may be the only one who truly succeeded.
Because his tomb is so small and it's so iconic and also quite weird, we are continuing to say his name in history.
The numbers just give us a handle on such an incredible find. More than 5,000 objects that came out of that tomb. More than 100 objects just found on the mummy itself. The millions of people who have visited the exhibits, it just gives you a sense of the scale and the importance of the entire phenomenon.
You do not have to rule the longest, and you do not have to be the best at what you do. You just have to be the most famous. Everyone will always know that name. I promise you I could step into a classroom 50 years from now. If I could say, name an Egyptian king, they will know King Tut.
I say King Tut, you say.
What?
If I had to go to the afterlife, I would totally bring my dog if he was already dead.
Be a king at the age of 9? That would have started wars with Rome by my 10th birthday.
I'm not killing my dog to bring him.
I remember Tut-mania from when I was a kid in the 70s, and they were all, I think, using a lot of cocaine.
I guess my husband, if you have to.
I want flamingos and polar bears in my court. That's because I can, and I'm 9 years old.
Oh, Walk Like an Egyptian, the Bangles. Yeah, that was a good one, too.
Walk like an Egyptian. Oh, God, terrible.